Chapter 1. Sometimes life isn't short enough. Jon cursed as his eyes opened, cursed at the light and at the weapon pointed at him. He closed them again, hoping to fall back into oblivion. No luck. He struggled to figure out where he was, but his memory remained thick and unyielding, the blackness oppressive. He searched the crevices of his mind for a clue, something to make sense of things, but nothing came to him. Jon opened his eyes again. The weapon was still trained on him. An energy weapon. How did he know that? Black and sleek, it conformed well to the gunman's hand, but the hand trembled. The man wasn't a soldier, wasn't a real threat. Jon looked up at a swollen, pock-marked face. Gray eyes looked back at him, wide and panicked. There was something about them, something familiar, but he couldn't place it. He tried to clear his mind, and some memories trickled through. Not enough to understand things yet, but he started to get his bearings. A sweet smell filled the air, a scent he knew. Red dust. That made sense. The confusion, the memory lapse. Everything would come back to him soon enough. Disjointed memories continued to flash in Jon's mind. His wife, his children, the grief of their loss. His heart pounded violently against his ribs. The memory, almost too much to bear. More memories flooded his mind, and he saw a myriad of faces, frightened, pleading faces, begging for mercy. A familiar cold detachment took hold and stifled his grief. He heard yelling behind him, and he switched his attention towards it. He turned to see a large, bearded man pointing a gun at someone else. Thick, well-defined muscles roped across the man's arms and shoulders. Dark eyebrows snapped together, bordering cold, murderous eyes. The bearded man pointed his gun at a third man sitting in a chair. Blood poured from the seated man's nose, and his eyes had swollen shut. Jon watched a meaty hand pound the side of the injured man's head. Despite the swelling, Jon was sure he knew him. Just then, something alien inside Jon stirred and his stomach lurched. Dread climbed up his spine, and he almost panicked, but forced the feeling away. What the hell was that? He tried to shift his focus and looked back at the man in the chair. He recognized him now. His name was Max. They were friends. Max had a lost look on his face. The poor bastard was taking a good beating. But for what? He looked around and realized he was in Max's apartment. The room itself looked like it had taken as much of a beating as Max. Glass shards littered the floor. A table was upended. The hollow emitter destroyed. How long was I asleep? Jon's mind became more lucid as the effects of the red dust continued to wear off. He recognized the alien creature inside his belly again. His muscles hardened as it continued to awaken. Red dust. That must be what they want. No surprise. It was what everyone wanted. Red dust was instant insomnia. It made the real world disappear. Most people used it to forget their wartime haunts. Jon was no different. He wanted to forget the wars and his part in them. It also subdued the creature, an added perk. Looking back again in Max's direction, he saw things had deteriorated. The bearded man had wound an electrical cord around Max's neck and twisted and pulled from behind. Max tried to dig his fingers in between the cord and his windpipe, desperate to save it from being crushed. Anger spiked through Jon. His rage fed the creature. Adrenaline surged through his body and cleared his mind. He recognized the attackers now. He had seen them at Max's place before. Red dust customers. The shaky one pointing the gun at him was Roke, and the big one strangling Max was Azan. Fucking junkies. Azan pulled on the cord with all his strength now, and the force yanked Max off his chair. Azan dragged Max gagging and thrashing across the floor, his face turning a bluish purple. He didn't have long, maybe a few seconds at most. "You're gonna kill him! We're not supposed to kill him!" said Roke. Azan ignored Roke's pleas and didn't let up, his mouth widening into a savage grin. Max's life ticked away. Jon's hands balled together into hard fists. He looked back at Roke, his gun pointed straight at Jon's head, finger tight on the trigger, knuckles white from the tension. The creature awoke. His body coiled. Time to act. Roke focused on Azan, and his gun shifted enough to give Jon an opportunity. In a blur of movement, Jon sprang up, grabbed Roke's wrist, and twisted. The gun discharged harmlessly, and Jon ripped it out of Roke's hand. Jon drove a heel into Roke's knee, and the sickening sound of snapping cartilage filled the room. He released his grip and let him crumple to the floor, screaming and clutching his broken knee. Jon felt the creature's silent roar and moved as if set off by a hair trigger. Spinning round, he saw Azan reaching for his own gun. Azan had no chance. Jon streaked across the room and hammered the gun's stock into Azan's jaw. A molar launched into the air, and Azan collapsed, the sheer force of the blow leaving him unconscious. Jon wanted to crush Azan's skull under his boot, but suppressed the urge and turned to Max. The sight made his stomach drop. Max's limp body lay inert on the floor. Had he acted too late? Cursing himself for his weakness, he reached down and placed a hand on Max's carotid artery, feeling for a pulse. Still alive. Jon exhaled in relief, but his body flexed, coiled in anticipation of more combat. He knew he would remain like this, his entire body like a tight spring, and there would be no respite. The creature would see to that. Max stirred, and Jon turned him over onto his back. He tried to speak, but heaved a groan of pain instead. "It's okay. Just relax for a minute," said Jon. He propped him up in a sitting position, making him cough in violent spasms. Jon inspected his neck. Other than it being heavily bruised, he found no permanent damage. "Okay, buddy. Your neck looks good. Just some bruises. You'll just need to rest for a bit." Max nodded. Jon got up and walked over to Roke, who lay in the corner sobbing. His leg jutted out in an obscene angle where Jon broke it. Jon wanted answers, and Roke was going to give them to him. "Why are you two lowlifes here?" said Jon. Roke continued to wail. "Stop crying or I'll break your other leg." Roke's eyes widened, and he bit his lip, his cries now just whimpers. "Why are you here?" "We came for the red dust," said Roke. Roke was lying. After hundreds of interrogations, Jon knew a lie when he saw one. That these two were trying to steal red dust seemed the obvious answer, and yet Roke lied. Jon stepped on Roke's broken knee, digging the heel of his boot into the mangled flesh. Roke screamed in agony. "Let's try that again. And this time, I want the truth. Why are you here?" "Please, I already told you the truth. We came to steal the red dust." Jon grabbed Roke's ankle and pulled upwards, still grinding his heel into his battered knee. Roke howled. Okay, I'll tell you the truth." Jon ignored Roke's pleas and continued wrenching his knee. He screamed and writhed in pain as Jon taught him the cost of playing games. When it looked like he would lose consciousness, Jon stopped. "Mr. Yang sent us." Jon looked back at Roke in disbelief. "Mr. Yang? The Triad? What does the Triad want with me?" "They want that thing inside you. My symbiont? How do they know about my symbiont?" "I don't know. They didn't tell us anything else. They just said to make sure we didn't kill you." "Kill me?" "That's funny." Jon laughed. He was losing respect for the Triad. "Why would they send you two idiots? Why not send professionals?" Roke didn't answer. Jon moved a step on his knee again. "To make it look red dust related. They didn't want the blowback." Jon understood. A professional operation would attract unwanted attention. The creature was military property after all, and even the Triad couldn't withstand the onslaught its theft would trigger. Still, this was a ballsy move, even for the Triad, but it didn't make any sense. Something wasn't right. Roke seemed like he was telling the truth, but his story was ridiculous. Jon left Roke whimpering on the floor and went back to check on Max. "I have to get going. I'm going to take these two with me. Just get some rest, okay?" Max nodded and forced a smile. Jon went back to Roke and Azan. He found some rope and hog-tied their hands and legs behind their backs, effortlessly lifted both men, one in each hand, and carried them outside. The darkness shielded him from curious eyes. Max lived in a less populated section of Hong Kong, one that had been hit hard during the wars. Many buildings were mere shells, and the few people who did live here didn't ask many questions. It made sense for Max, considering his line of work. Jon lugged Roke and Azan down a narrow street, the darkness almost complete. Azan was awake now, and they both groaned with each step. Roke pleaded again. "Please, don't kill us. We'll disappear. You'll never see us again." "Oh, I'm sure I won't. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to dump you off somewhere, and you can figure the rest out on your own. Now shut up before I change my mind." They continued to moan, but didn't dare speak. Jon soon came upon the bombed-out shell of an old building, one of the many scabs left in the landscape from the wars. It was a bizarre mix of mangled steel and concrete. The roof had a gaping hole, and the entire left side of the building was crumbling and blackened from fires that had long since burned out. In contrast, the right side was still solid and seemed structurally sound. At least, it didn't look like it was going to collapse anytime soon. As good a place as any. Jon hauled his two captives into the structure and threw them onto a pile of garbage left by the building's previous occupants. They couldn't do much harm here, and someone would eventually find them and let them go. "You know what'll happen if I see you again?" said Jon. The two nodded. "Good." Jon turned to leave, feeling the creature's protest as he stepped toward the exit. He knew it still considered Roke and Azan a threat, but he didn't care. They weren't a threat, and he wouldn't kill them. Ignoring the creature, he continued to leave. A searing pain started in his bowels, making him bend at the waist. Lurching forward, he took a couple more steps. The pain spread in violent waves through his intestines, into his abdomen, attacking his kidneys and then his lungs. Unable to withstand any more, he collapsed. He writhed in agony as the creature punished him for his obstinance. Jon endured the pain for several minutes. He had given in and agreed to comply, but the pain continued, punitive in nature, ruthless in execution. When Jon had suffered enough, the pain stopped. Curled up in a fetal position, he gasped for air, relieved that the ordeal was over. In the same way the pain had ripped through his body, now a comforting warmth washed over him, bringing with it much-needed relief. A few minutes passed. Jon stood, turned and walked toward Roke and Azan. They gaped back at him, a look of shock on their faces, trying to comprehend what they just witnessed. Standing in front of them, Jon apologized, and then, in two quick motions, snapped each of their necks. Chapter 2. Talos looked down at the blue planet below, its oceans reminding him of home. Why had he been summoned to such an insignificant corner of the galaxy? He had heard whispers about these humans, about how the Great Seer considered them extraordinary in some way. For the life of him, he did not see it. They were merely another upstart species, propped up by Diakon might. If not for Diakon intervention, these humans would still be Jatari slaves. They owed everything to Diakos. Every breath they took was a Diakon gift. Why bring him here? Why waste his expertise on these creatures? The Jatari had been defeated, the human defenses shored, this system secured. He knew of nothing that would require him to travel all this way. He hoped the need would not be too great. He assured himself it would be no more than some minor advisory services, and then he could finally return to Diakos. He had been away from the homeworld for far too long. The wars had pulled him to many different corners of the galaxy, like this one. Too many planets, too many battles. Even when the wars ended, there was work for him to do. He continued to be pulled throughout the galaxy, this time for his expertise. Diakon's space had expanded, and it needed to be secured. His advisory services were in greater demand than he expected, but he longed for the homeworld. He longed to see the great oceans of Diakos again. When was the last time he felt the heat of its giant red star on his skin? How long since he gazed upon the many moons, floating in the sky like orbs, so close you thought you could scoop them into your hands? Soon, he thought, soon. "Ambassador Varius will see you now," said a synthetic voice. A door behind him slid open, and he turned from the window and walked through.
"Greetings, General Talos,"
said Ambassador Varios. "Greetings, Ambassador." He wondered why someone with Varios' reputation would be posted as ambassador to the humans. By all accounts, this was a junior position. Who did he offend to get banished here? Talos wondered if he himself hadn't unwittingly offended a high-ranking official somewhere. Could that be it? Was this some sort of banishment? He shuddered at the thought.
I am sure you are wondering why you have been summoned to such a remote system. The Order is curious.
It was more than curious. It was offensive, but he dared not say so.
What do you know of the humans, General? I know that they were Jatari slaves. Now their system is a Diacon protectorate. The only reason this system has any strategic significance at all is the jump gate it has access to. And what of their capabilities? Whispers. Only whispers. They are unimpressive. They rely on Diacon technology and assistance for their survival. Without our help, they are like children alone and adrift on a vast sea. The Great Seer has foretold otherwise. Could the whispers be true? The humans will rise to power in the galaxy. Impossible. They barely stand on their own. Without a Diacon presence in their system, the Jatari Empire would conquer them again. For now, this will change quicker than you can believe possible. I do not presume to question the Great Seer. If she has foretold of their rise, then it is so. What else has she seen? Do they become a threat to Diakos? It is unclear, but their rise is certain. The Great Seer warns that it is imperative that their ascension be controlled. If it is managed, they will not become a threat to Diakos. And if we cannot manage their ascension, then they must be terminated before they become too powerful. Why not terminate their species now and avoid the potential threat altogether? The Great Seer has foretold of yet another threat, one as yet undiscovered. The humans will contain that threat. Without them, it will grow unchecked and plague our borders, eventually weakening the Empire. As Diakos weakens, others will grow bold and challenge our power. Over time, Diakos will atrophy, and our enemies will feed on our withering bones. The Empire, a forgotten legend. This cannot be allowed. Diakos has gained too much at too high a cost. By her will, Diakos shall prevail. The Great Seer is wise beyond comprehension.
Varios bowed his head in reverence.
By her will,
said Talos, bowing his head as well. After a few moments, the two Diacons raised their heads.
How may I serve Diakos?
Chapter 3. Jon walked for a couple of hours, making his way down a hill along a winding road. Signs of progress dotted the landscape. Everywhere he looked, he saw growth. Many buildings had already risen from the ruins like defiant fists. It made him hopeful. The Jatari Empire had severely scarred humanity. 500 long years under alien occupation, countless atrocities, orbital bombardment, mass murder, forced labor, stolen children, and then the wars of liberation and their cost. Earth finally had an opportunity to rebuild. Humanity had a chance to recover, even if it was too late for him. Still, the ruins were everywhere. On the walls of one destroyed building were the words, "Soul shall rise," the rallying cry of the revolution. Too few believed those words now. Why fight for something when you're being spoon-fed? At the bottom of the hill, things got busier. It was still night, but the streets filled with people. Hong Kong never slept. An open-air market stretched ahead for countless city blocks. Crowds of people haggled and shouted. The smell of fish and seafood filled the air, making his stomach growl. When had he last eaten? Shaky columns of cages filled with live chickens stood next to the fruits and vegetables. Colorful textiles butted up against the weapon stands, hawking the latest in energy weapons. Anything could be purchased here, so long as you knew what to ask for and how to ask for it. Jon made his way down the street. He had no interest in shopping, but didn't mind mixing in the crowds. He wondered what Yang would do once he realized that Azan and Roque were dead. If he came after Jon again, it wouldn't be with amateurs. Jon wasn't particularly worried, but he still needed to think things through. It was time to get to his ship. R&R was over. A man made eye contact with Jon. It was only for a moment, but that was all he needed. Physically larger than most, he towered over those around him. A battle-hardened face and the menacing eyes of a killer ensured that people got out of his way. The fact that the man made eye contact was the first clue. That Jon always knew a killer's eyes when he saw them was the second. Had the triad found him? Scanning the crowd, Jon analyzed his options. It was likely more than one opponent, probably 4 or 5. While he used the crowd for cover, he realized his adversaries were doing the same, except they were getting into position, likely putting Jon into a box formation, flanking him on all sides. While not overly concerned with civilian deaths, they would likely avoid attacking in the middle of the market. That reluctance gave him a small edge. He had kept Roque's gun, but needed something more powerful. He turned and walked up to a weapon stand, still scanning the crowd. He spotted 2 more attackers. They had moved into position on his left flank. They were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. The weapon stand's merchant looked at Jon and gave him a knowing smile. This man had obviously spent some time around soldiers. Jon eyed an X-51, a powerful energy weapon. It was perfect. Skipping the formalities, he looked the merchant straight in the eyes and spoke in a low, calm voice. "I'll pay you double if you put a fully charged cartridge into that X-51. The smile slowly disappeared. The merchant became visibly nervous, understanding what was about to happen. He seemed to analyze his option, sizing up Jon and making some quick calculations. It didn't take him long. No fool, he understood that Jon was not someone to toy with. Reaching under the counter, he casually pulled out an energy cartridge, armed the X-51, and placed it back down on the table. Jon smiled at the merchant and nodded his thanks. "Get down." Before the merchant could hit the ground, Jon seized the weapon and wheeled around, firing twice as he turned. Each shot found its target, the power of the X-51 hurling both men back several feet. A half-second later, and Jon was sprinting, opening fire on the third attacker. Blue light pierced the man's torso, creating a smoldering crater where his chest had been. Based on the formation his attackers used, Jon knew the other 2 men's locations and the trajectory their fire would take. He found cover just as a barrage of energy bursts landed. Blue fire rained down all around Jon. The shooters weren't worried about the crowd anymore, the market becoming a horrid scene of panic and dead bodies. Their lines of fire allowed Jon to determine their precise locations. The shooters fired relentlessly. Powerful blasts scorched the market, burning through wood and melting glass like butter. Jon crouched into a ball, motionless, and waited for an opportunity. After several more seconds, their fire slowed and adopted a pattern of predictable bursts. The shooters must have thought Jon was dead, but didn't want to take any chances. He timed their fire, timed their pauses, established the pattern, leaped and fired. A single energy blast crashed into the shooter's face, almost decapitating him. The other shooter let loose another barrage. Blue bolts chased Jon, biting at his heels. The shooter's speed and accuracy surprised him. The creature made Jon faster and stronger than normal humans, so the shooter should not have adjusted to his speed as well as he did. Jon dove behind the walls of a fruit stand, blue fire missing him by mere centimeters. He crouched down, making himself as small as possible. Produce exploded, and wood splinters flew around him like angry hornets. This was not the triad. This was something worse, something Jon hadn't seen since the wars. The blue fire changed direction. The shooter was moving, circling. He would have a clear shot in seconds. Jon coiled and dove again. Anticipating the shooter's movement, Jon shot in the direction he was running. To Jon's surprise, the man changed direction and the shot missed. Anybody else would have been dead. Another storm of blue lightning rained down on Jon's position, forcing him to bolt again. The shots were closer now. The shooter tried to bridge the gap between them, upping the ante. That suited Jon just fine. He zigzagged across the road, returning fire as he went. Again, the shots were barely missing him and adjusted expertly to his movements. He had to change tactics. The shooter wanted to bridge the gap so Jon would give him what he wanted. Changing direction, he raced toward the attacker. This caught the man off guard, and he tried to compensate, but Jon already knew which way he would turn, and had to let loose a stream of blue fire in that direction. The shooter tried to stop, but his momentum was too strong. Blue energy bursts plowed into his torso, spinning him round like a top till he dropped to the ground. Jon found cover and waited, scanning the market, ensuring no other surprises were waiting for him. Once certain the threat had passed, he rose and ran to the last shooter's position. The man lay face down in a heap. Jon turned him over. Scorch marks riddled his torso, the putrid smell of burnt flesh rising from his body. Turning his head, Jon looked behind the man's ear. It was just as he suspected. A tiny mark, almost invisible, hid there. The mark of the Sciencefictionaudiobook. Elite human soldiers, the Sciencefictionaudiobook were taken from their parents as children and raised to be the most loyal soldiers of the Jatari Empire. Augmented with alien technology, they possessed superhuman strength and speed. Jon had fought them many times during the wars. But why were they here? The wars were over. There should not be any Sciencefictionaudiobook left on Earth. And why were they trying to kill him? The Triad's story must have been a deception. It would be easy enough to feed Roke and Azan disinformation. They wanted Jon in the dark, so they could ambush him. But they hadn't anticipated his actions in the market. Jon figured he'd hang on to the X-51 for a while longer. He had his fill of surprises for one night. Happy to be paid, the merchant didn't ask any questions. The market was now a scene of destruction and carnage. Jon didn't want to deal with the local authorities and quickly left. After walking for several kilometers, he reached the Kowloon spaceport. Above him, the morning sky was littered with all sorts of ships, large and small, coming and going. Ahead was an array of terminal and service buildings, hangars, and parking stalls connected by a mix of runways, roadways, and landing pads. Jon walked past the main terminal and approached a large, unmarked secondary building. He walked up to the main doors, and a hollow emitter flashed a stop sign in his path. "Please stand still for DNA scan," said a synthetic voice. Jon heard the low humming sound of the scanners as they analyzed his DNA signature. After a few moments, the holographic stop sign disappeared, and the door slid open. "Thank you, Captain Pike. You may enter." Jon walked into a massive open area, the Hill. Every spaceport had one. Military and civilian personnel zipped around like ants. Crates moved to and fro, soldiers readied for flight. All around was a buzz of activity. Jon proceeded through the building until he came to a set of large metal doors. Another DNA scan and he was through, and into a long, well-lit corridor. Military activity dominated now, and the familiar blue and white Space Force insignia was everywhere. Along the right-hand side of the corridor were access tubes leading to various docking bays. When he reached tube G17, he turned and entered. He followed a string of lights to the end of the tube and stopped at a large hatch. More DNA scanners went to work. He ignored the concealed energy weapons he knew were trained on him, programmed to glass anyone accessing his ship without authorization. They wouldn't fire on Jon. The DNA scanner cleared him, and the hatch opened. Lights turned on, and a hatch in the forward bulkhead of the compact ship opened, revealing the cockpit. Jon stepped through the hatch and sat down in the pilot's chair. An ordered chaos of controls and displays surrounded him. Jon pushed a button, and a screen lit up. "Captain Jon Pike reporting." A middle-aged woman's face appeared on the screen. "Good morning, Captain," she smiled. "How has your R&R been? I hope you are well rested." "I'm as rested as I'm going to get." "Glad to hear it, Captain. You have orders to report to Admiral Walsh at Orbital Station Alpha." "Understood. We'll set course for Orbital Station Alpha immediately." "Thank you, Captain. I will let Admiral Walsh know you are on your way." "Captain Pike out." The display flickered off, and Jon leaned back in his chair. So much for R&R. Time to get back to work. Sitting up again, he pushed some more buttons on his console. The exterior hatch swung closed with a whine and a hiss. Outside, the ship's engines came on, and the ship began to vibrate. The engines became louder as Jon maneuvered away from the docking tube. Once clear, Jon fired the ship's thrusters and quickly climbed up and away from the spaceport. His ship rocketed higher to the upper reaches of the strata. He took one last look at Hong Kong, wondered about the Sciencefictionaudiobook, and what other surprises might be in store for him. The city disappeared underneath a bed of clouds, and Jon pushed the threat out of his mind. Speeding up, The little ship raced to the edges of the atmosphere and into the dark void of space. Chapter 4. Jon arrived early for his meeting. Walking into Admiral Walsh's office, he was dismayed to find a Daikan there. Standing at attention, he saluted the Admiral. Walsh responded with a lazy salute, barely looking up from his desk, and gestured for Jon to sit down. Jon glanced sideways at the Daikan, the thing repulsive to look at. It was a biped like humans. That's where the similarities ended. It had green skin like a lizard and some kind of gills on its neck like a fish. Big fish eyes were fixed on a flat face. The thing had eyelids, but hardly ever blinked. It was like it wouldn't stop staring at him, making Jon want to beat it into the ground. "Captain Pike, this is Ambassador Varios." The Admiral locked eyes with Jon. His icy stare warned Jon to keep his feelings about the Daikans to himself. "Greetings, Ambassador." Jon almost choked on his words, but gave the Ambassador his best politician smile.
"Greetings, Captain."
The Daikan spoke with a hiss. Jon wanted to put a hand in front of his face, afraid the thing was going to spit on him. Walsh got straight to business. "Captain, what do you know about the lost colonies?" "Just the same legends everyone else knows, sir. Humans used the jump gates to colonize planets thousands of light years away. When the Jatari Empire invaded the Sol system, the colonists shut down their jump gates to protect themselves." "It isn't legend, Captain. It's fact. We haven't heard from the colonies in over 500 years. But they're out there, and we want to find them again." "Yes, sir. But how is that possible? With their jump gates closed, it would take a lifetime to find them. Maybe 2 lifetimes. "That's why I called you here, Captain. We've been working on an experimental propulsion system in cooperation with the Daikans. It works much like the jump gates do. With it, a ship can jump as much as 50 light years at a time." "Without jump gates?" Jon said. "Correct," Walsh replied. Jon leaned back in his chair and thought about what he had just heard. If true, this would be the biggest advancement since the discovery of the jump gates. "That sounds impressive, sir. I take it you want to use this jump drive technology to find the lost colonies." "That's correct, Captain." "You said the technology was experimental. How long till we can power a ship with one of these propulsion systems?" "We're already there, Captain. We've built a ship and fitted it with the jump system, and we want you to command it." Jon thought the Admiral must have fallen on his head. "With all due respect, sir, I'm covert ops. I kill people. I don't command starships." "Commandeering a starship is part of your training. You know as much as you need to know to command one. Regardless, your experience operating behind enemy lines makes you the perfect candidate. We don't know what we're going to find out there, and I need someone who can adapt to any situation. That someone is you. You're also the only human with a Daikan symbiont, which is why the Daikans prefer you commanding the ship." And there it was. The Daikans were behind it all. They told the Admiral to choose Jon because of the symbiont. Jon's eyes narrowed, and he thought of all the different ways he could kill both Walsh and Varios. It would be over in seconds. The idea comforted him. Jon then thought about the market attack. Was this why the Shanasar tried to ambush him? The Jatari Empire had spies everywhere. Did they know about the jump system? Was there a mole? Jon decided it was best to keep his suspicions to himself for the time being. He didn't want to command this starship. He didn't want the Daikans pulling his strings, and he sure as hell didn't want to keep their symbiont inside him anymore. "About the symbiont, sir. I want the thing out of me."
"I'm afraid that is not possible, Captain,"
said Ambassador Varios. Jon forced himself to look at the Ambassador.
"Your physiology is unfortunately not as resilient as the Daikans. While we can remove our symbionts without harm, I'm afraid that it does not work the same way for you. If we remove your symbiont, you will die."
Anger spiked through Jon. That wasn't part of the deal. This was supposed to be temporary.
"Your symbiont was created specifically for you, Captain. It is military grade, designed to enhance your senses, speed, and strength, as well as your strategic and tactical capabilities. This has been successful. But we did not anticipate how it would react to your physiology. Captain, the symbiont has entrenched itself, fortified its position.
So you designed a military-grade symbiont, and now you're surprised that it's acted in a military way, right?
Yes, Captain, that is correct.
Jon leaned towards the die can, ready to pounce. None of this was intended, Captain. You knew the risks going in, said Walsh. Jon simmered. These die cans were no better than the Jatari. Aliens. Jon hated all of them. He killed plenty of aliens during the wars. They were all Jatari, but Jon didn't think he'd mind killing a few die cans too much. And there was Walsh kissing their scaly asses. Jon imagined his fingers wrapped around Walsh's windpipe and wondered how much effort he would need to rip it out of his throat. The truth is, that thing inside you, combined with your training and experience, make you the perfect person for this mission, said Walsh. Yes, sir. Jon settled back into his chair. The Admiral had made up his mind. There was no point arguing with him. Jon was a soldier first, and this was a mission like any other. Time to get on with it. He would deal with the symbiont issue later. Walsh noticed Jon's change in posture and nodded. I am uploading your orders, along with ship configuration and crew profiles. Understood. When can I see the ship? It's named Hermes. I've arranged for your quarters to be relocated to the ship. You'll have a few weeks to get familiar with it and the crew. The engineering team is already on board, as are your security personnel and your XO. A couple of Marines are waiting outside and will take you to the ship as soon as we're done. Thank you, sir. If that is all, I'd like to get on with it. Jon wanted to get out of Walsh's office before he was court-martialed for killing a superior officer. That is all, Captain. Dismissed. Jon rose, stood at attention, and saluted. The Admiral responded with the same lazy salute.
Good luck, Captain,
said Ambassador Varios. Jon didn't look at the ambassador, didn't acknowledge him in any way. Instead, he turned and walked out the door. Outside the office, 2 Marines were waiting. One of the Marines stepped forward. Captain Pike? Yes, Corporal. We have orders to escort you to the Hermes, sir. Lead the way, Corporal. The Marines turned and marched down the corridor with Jon following. He thought about his mission. He could be gone for years. The idea was growing on him. This might be just what he needed. Jon saw the Hermes from one of the windows. Construction crews still worked on her. She sat there, motionless, like she was stalking prey. Smaller than a dreadnought-class battleship, she was larger than a destroyer, though not as bulky. Sleek, like a racer. Her bow tapered almost to a point, and the body expanded into smooth curves. She looked like she could pierce the sky. She may have looked like a racer, but she was no lightweight. Missile tubes, railguns, and energy weapons spread out across her hull. The Hermes was a killer. She looked like she could take on any Jatari ship and win. He wondered how agile she was and proceeded to board. He'd find out soon enough.